People think a marriage falls apart after one big mistake. It doesn't. It falls apart after 1,000 tiny moments when one person says, "That hurt," and the other laughs. Daniel Harris learned that lesson on his 40th birthday. Unfortunately, so did everyone else. Daniel wasn't difficult to love. He taught American history at Roosevelt High School outside Denver. Students adored him because he remembered their names long after graduation. Neighbors trusted him with spare house keys. Every Saturday morning, he'd disappear into his garage to rebuild old motorcycles while classic rock played through a dusty radio. If life had a volume knob, Daniel liked it low. His wife, Jessica, preferred it all the way up. 3 million people followed her online. She wasn't famous for cooking or traveling. She was famous for turning ordinary people into extraordinary reactions. Most of those reactions belonged to Daniel. At first, he laughed along. Then he started asking her not to film certain moments. "Please don't post this one." Jessica always kissed his cheek and smiled. "Babe, it's just for fun." After enough tomorrows, no slowly became invisible. The rooftop restaurant overlooked downtown Denver. Golden lights stretched across the skyline. 40 guests filled the room. Jessica had planned everything. Daniel's parents flew in from Phoenix. His younger brother, Tyler, came from Seattle. Even Daniel's favorite students had recorded birthday messages that played on a giant screen. For a while, it was perfect. Daniel actually forgot there were cameras until Jessica stood up. She tapped her champagne glass. "I saved the biggest surprise for last." The room cheered. Almost automatically, phones appeared. Daniel's smile faded just a little. He knew that look. 2 waiters rolled out an enormous white gift box wrapped with a blue ribbon. Jessica handed Daniel a small silver key. "Open it," he laughed awkwardly. "I suddenly don't want to." The room laughed with him. Jessica winked. "Trust me." Daniel unlocked the box. Inside, a manila envelope. He opened it. The first page made his breathing stop. "Notice OF divorce e dings. He dings." He read the words twice, maybe 3 times. His hands trembled. Around the room, no one moved. Then Jessica burst into laughter. "Oh my God! You actually believed it!" The room exploded. Someone nearly dropped their phone laughing. Another yelled, "Best prank ever!" Daniel slowly lifted his eyes. Every face was smiling. Every phone was recording. Even Tyler. For one long second, Daniel looked completely alone. Then he smiled. Not because he found it funny, because he'd spent years learning how to hide pain without making anyone uncomfortable. The party ended around 11. Guests hugged Daniel, still laughing. Some asked him to recreate his reaction for TikTok. He politely declined. On the drive home, Jessica kept checking her phone. "It's already over 1 million views." Daniel looked out the passenger window. The city lights blurred past. "That's fast," she smiled. "I told you it'd be hilarious," he nodded. Neither spoke again. The next morning, Jessica woke to the smell of coffee. Daniel had already made breakfast, her favorite blueberry pancakes. He even packed her lunch. Everything felt normal, almost too normal. She kissed him goodbye. "You still love me?" He smiled. "I never stopped," she laughed. "I'll see you tonight." Daniel picked up his car keys. "You probably won't," Jessica frowned. "What does that mean?" He smiled again. "The pancakes are getting cold." Then he walked out the front door. At 4:15 p.m., Jessica texted him, "How's your day?" No reply. At 6 o'clock, she called. Voicemail. By midnight, she was angry. By sunrise, she was scared. Daniel never came home. His phone was turned off. His bank account hadn't been touched. His credit card stayed unused. His motorcycle was gone. Nothing else. No suitcase. No goodbye note. No dramatic social media post. Just silence. Jessica called Roosevelt High. The principal answered immediately. "Oh, I thought Daniel told you." "Told me what?" "He resigned." Jessica felt her heartbeat in her throat. "When?" The principal hesitated. "About 4 months ago." Jessica stared at the wall. "What?" "He asked us not to say anything until the end of the semester. He wanted to finish teaching his seniors. He said after graduation, he was starting a completely different life." Jessica couldn't breathe. 4 months. That meant one thing. Daniel hadn't left because of the birthday prank. He had already decided to leave long before it happened. The prank hadn't ended the marriage. It had only confirmed that leaving was the right decision. Jessica didn't sleep. She sat on the living room floor until sunrise, replaying one sentence in her head. He resigned 4 months ago. 4 months. That meant Daniel had been planning a new life while still making her coffee every morning, still asking about her day, still fixing the loose cabinet door she'd been complaining about for weeks. How could someone leave so quietly? Or maybe, how could she miss it so completely? The next morning, she drove to Roosevelt High. Daniel's classroom had already been cleaned out. The walls were bare. The bookshelves were empty. His desk sat alone in the middle of the room. The school custodian smiled when he saw her. "You must be Jessica," she nodded. "I was hoping to collect some of Daniel's things." The old man looked confused. "There isn't much left." He reached into a cabinet and pulled out a small cardboard box. Inside were 3 things: a coffee mug she'd given Daniel on their first anniversary, a worn baseball from a former student, and a handwritten thank you card. Not from Jessica, from one of Daniel's students. "Mr. Harris, thank you for convincing me not to quit school. You probably don't remember saying it, but you told me one bad day shouldn't decide the rest of my life." Jessica read it twice. Daniel had saved it. She couldn't remember the last birthday card she'd given him. As she turned to leave, the principal stopped her. "There's one more thing." He opened a drawer and handed her a sealed envelope. "For 6 months, Daniel met with our school counselor every Thursday during lunch." Jessica looked surprised. "I didn't know." The principal gave her a sympathetic smile. "He didn't want anyone to know. Inside the envelope wasn't a letter. It was a business card. Dr. Emily Carter, licensed marriage and trauma therapist." Written on the back, in Daniel's handwriting, were 5 words. "I tried before I left." Jessica felt her knees weaken. An hour later, she was sitting across from Dr. Emily Carter. The therapist folded her hands. "Daniel signed a release allowing me to speak with you, but only if he left voluntarily." Jessica looked down. "So, he really planned this." Emily nodded gently. "He didn't plan to hurt you. He planned to stop hurting himself." Jessica closed her eyes. "I don't understand." Emily reached for a notebook. "This isn't Daniel's journal. It's something I asked him to do." She slid it across the table. Each page contained the same 2 columns. What happened? How it made me feel. Jessica, read the first entry. "Asked Jessica not to film dinner with my parents. She laughed and said my family was great content. I smiled anyway." The next. "Asked her to delete a video after my panic attack. She said nobody would know I was serious." Another. "Told her I felt invisible. She kissed me, then checked her notifications before I finished talking." Jessica couldn't keep reading. Tears blurred the words. These weren't huge betrayals. They were tiny cuts, hundreds of them. Emily spoke quietly. "Daniel never came here asking how to leave his marriage." Jessica looked up hopefully. "He came asking how to save it. What happened?" Emily sighed. "I suggested couples therapy." Jessica froze. "He never asked me." Emily held her gaze. "He told me he did." Jessica searched her memory. Then it hit her. 6 months earlier, Daniel had said, "Maybe we should talk to someone." She'd laughed. "We're not one of those couples." Then she'd changed the subject because a brand had called about a sponsorship. She had completely forgotten the conversation. Daniel hadn't. For the first time since he disappeared, Jessica stopped crying. Not because the pain was gone, because denial was. She finally saw the truth. The birthday prank hadn't broken Daniel. It had simply happened on the day he finally accepted. Nothing was ever going to change. Over the next few weeks, Jessica quietly disappeared from social media. No farewell video, no emotional apology. She simply stopped posting. Companies canceled sponsorships. Followers disappeared. Friends she thought were close stopped calling. Without the internet, her phone became strangely silent. For the first time in years, she understood what loneliness actually sounded like. 6 months later, Jessica volunteered every Saturday at a youth center, teaching kids basic photography. Not for likes, not for money, just because she wanted to create something that would never be uploaded. One rainy afternoon, Tyler walked into the classroom carrying an old motorcycle helmet. "I've been looking for you." Jessica's heart skipped. "You found him." Tyler nodded. "I did." She stood so quickly her chair scraped across the floor. "Is he okay?" A small smile crossed Tyler's face. "He looks happier than I've seen him in years." Jessica looked toward the window. "I need to see him." Tyler's smile disappeared. "You can, but there's one condition." She looked back. "What is it?" Tyler handed her a folded piece of paper, an address. Then he said quietly, "If you love him, don't ask him to come back." Jessica slipped the paper into her pocket. For the first time in 6 months, she was about to see the man she had spent half a year trying to understand. Jessica parked across the street from the address Tyler had given her. It wasn't a house. It wasn't a cabin. It wasn't another school. It was an old brick building with a faded sign that read, "Second Chance Garage." The large garage doors were open. Inside, she could hear laughter. Real laughter. Not the kind that came from a prank. The kind that came from people who felt safe. Jessica slowly walked closer. She stopped just outside the entrance. Daniel stood beneath the raised hood of an old 1968 Mustang. 5 teenagers surrounded him, their hands covered in grease. One boy struggled to loosen a rusted bolt. Daniel smiled. "Easy. Don't force it. If you force something that's fighting you, you're probably fixing the wrong problem." The teenagers laughed. Jessica felt the words hit her like a punch, because he wasn't talking about the engine. She stayed where she was, hidden, watching. One teenager accidentally dropped an expensive socket wrench. "I'm sorry." Daniel picked it up, smiled, and handed it back. "No harm done. Tools can be replaced. People can't." Jessica lowered her head. That was the man she'd spent years turning into online entertainment. Nearly 30 minutes passed before Daniel finally looked toward the garage door. Their eyes met. He froze for only a second. Then he quietly handed the wrench to one of the teenagers. "You've got this." He walked outside. Neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was honest. Finally, Jessica smiled weakly. "I almost didn't come." Daniel nodded. "I know." "You knew?" "I know you better than you think." She laughed softly through her tears. "For the first time." "I don't think that's true." Jessica took a slow breath. "I kept rehearsing this conversation. I had this long apology planned." Daniel smiled gently. "And?" She shook her head. "It doesn't matter anymore." Another quiet moment passed. Then she said the words she'd never been brave enough to admit. "I spent years asking strangers to love my life instead of loving the person living it." Daniel looked away. She continued. "I thought every view meant people cared. But all I really did was stop paying attention to the one person who actually did." Daniel folded his arms. "I wasn't perfect either." Jessica looked surprised. "I should have stopped pretending I was okay. I kept saying it's fine because arguing was exhausting. And every time I stayed silent, I made it easier for both of us to believe silence meant acceptance." Jessica slowly nodded. "Maybe we both stopped telling the truth." Daniel smiled. "I think we did." She finally asked the question she'd carried for months. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Did you ever stop loving me?" Daniel answered immediately. "No, I stopped recognizing myself. And once that happened, I knew I couldn't be the husband you deserved." Jessica whispered. "You were." He smiled sadly. "No, the husband you deserved would have told you the truth years earlier." Jessica wiped away another tear. "So, there's no going back." Daniel looked through the garage window. One of the teenagers was proudly starting the Mustang's engine for the first time. The garage erupted in cheers. Daniel smiled at the sound. Then he looked back at Jessica. "You know what's funny?" She shook her head. "I used to think leaving meant giving up." He paused. "It turned out leaving was the first honest decision I'd made in years." Jessica nodded. "I understand." And for the first time, she truly did. She turned toward her car. Halfway there, someone called after her, "Mrs. Harris!" One of the teenagers ran over holding an old metal lunchbox. "I think Mr. Harris would want you to have this." Jessica frowned. "He didn't send you?" The boy shook his head. "No. I just think it belongs with you now. Inside the lunchbox were dozens of small things. Movie ticket stubs, a seashell from their honeymoon, the keychain she'd bought him on their first road trip, a faded grocery list with "Don't forget Jessica's favorite coffee" scribbled across the top. Years of tiny memories. At the very bottom lay a flash drive. Jessica looked toward Daniel. He gave her a small nod. She plugged it into her car before driving away. One video appeared, recorded the night before her birthday. Daniel sat alone in the garage. He looked directly into the camera. "Hi, Jess. If you're watching this, it means I finally left," he smiled sadly. "I recorded this message a dozen times. I kept trying to explain why. But every version sounded like I was blaming you. So let me say the only thing that really matters." He took a long breath. "You were never the villain in my story. You were the love of my life. We just slowly became two people who stopped seeing each other." He looked down for a moment, then back into the camera. "I hope one day someone loves the new version of you, because she listens." His eyes filled with tears. "And I hope you'll remember the best parts of me." The screen faded to black. Jessica sat in her car, crying harder than she had in months, not because she still hoped he'd come back, but because she finally understood love isn't lost in one unforgettable moment. It's lost in 1,000 forgettable ones. Across the street, Daniel watched her car pull away. He smiled, not with regret, but with gratitude. Then he walked back into the garage. A teenager handed him a wrench. "Ready?" Daniel looked at the half-finished Mustang. "Yeah, let's finish what we started." The garage door slowly rolled shut.